I'm Mark Sanford, and I'm a Republican running for the United States Congress here in the 1st Congressional District. I would ask for your vote and your support, and let me offer a reasoning as to why. I'm running for Congress because I believe that unless we turn our financial house around in Washington, D.C., there are going to be incredible consequences in terms of the value of the dollar, incredible consequences in terms of savings, what do we have saved or hope to save, and really incredible consequences in terms of the American dream and in essence, the opportunities that is historically provided. I've worked awfully hard on this front for a long time. I was actually rated #1 in the whole United States Congress in efforts to limit federal spending and limit federal taxation. I was rated the same by the Citizens Against Government Waste, in addition to the NTU rating that I just referred to. I was rated as financially the most conservative governor in the United States of America. I was the first governor to turn back stimulus money at a time when it wasn't popular. And all those things add up to, again, I think the building blocks of job creation in this country and in this state. I think if you look at the Congressional Budget Office numbers, what they now show is that there will be a 1.7% drag. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot in a 2% growth kind of economy if we don't get our financial house in order. So I think there are real ramifications in terms of our savings, in terms of the American dream, in terms of jobs and economic opportunity if we don't get our financial house in order. I'd like to go to Washington to do something about just that.
Please provide 2 or 3 recommendations you have for restructuring Medicare and Social Security to address the federal deficit.
I think that one of the things that's incredibly important is simply acting now. The Congressional Budget Office numbers show that in just 12 years, there will only be enough money to pay for interest and entitlements only, period. So I think that underscores the importance of now. I think it's incredibly important to not yank the rug out from underneath existing retirees or people nearing retirement. And people have made life plans and made retirement plans based on a set of promises. I think that those promises ought to be fulfilled as we move and transition to something that will keep the system sustainable over the long run. And finally, I would say we got to look at innovative ways of avoiding, in essence, the trap that's been set. I mean, I think that means moving away from a unified budget where money gets spent in Washington. I think that means, for instance, with Medicare, Part A, B, and D ought to be combined in a single premium. I think that you ought to look for this larger notion of a true insurance program with Medicare. I think you ought to look at premium support. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that can be done that would make a real difference in the solvency of the plan and its workability for folks across this country.
How specifically would you use your office to attract industries and jobs to South Carolina?
I think that I would do a lot of what I've done. I mean, I knew the chairman of Boeing for a long time and had a 6.5-year conversation with him on Boeing coming to Charleston, South Carolina. I got to know Enzo Caiazzo, who's head of, Alenia, well, not head up, but the decision maker with regard to their decision to come to Charleston. I got to know Tom Risley, who's head of Vought, that formed the original global aeronautic investment, the $600 million investment that was in essence the beachhead to Boeing coming here. So I'd say in part with the relationships that have been formed during my time in the United States Congress and the governorship, and in part by focusing on soil conditions. We saw more cumulative investment during my governorship than during any other 8-year period in South Carolina history. $24 billion of cumulative investment. That includes the $750 million that went into Boeing. And so we focused on the soil conditions that are important to the growth of indigenous business here in our state, or 2 kids in a basement wanting to start up a business, or a foreign company looking at coming to our state. And that's why it mattered that we passed the first marginal income tax cut to South Carolina, largest recurring tax cut, workers' comp, employment security commission reform, charter school reform, a whole bunch of other things that were all about ultimately getting the soil conditions better for business here in this state.
Please explain why you do or do not support the Environmental Protection Agency's efforts to enforce strong clean air and clean water standards in America.
Well, I do support them. As a conservative, I believe that my rights end when they begin to infringe upon yours. And I think that there is a role for government, therefore, in making sure that the waste of a company or an individual doesn't become the air that I breathe or the water that I want to drink. I pushed very hard on that during both my time in Congress and the governorship. That's why Ultimately, the Sierra Club, which is an odd phenomenon for a Republican, endorsed me in my second run for the governorship. It's why the League of Conservation Voters endorsed me in my second run for the governorship, because, you know, cumulatively, we'd set aside more land during my governorship and protected more land than during any other in all of South Carolina history, because we focused on that notion of being, in essence, environmental and conservation stewards for the natural resources that we enjoy, both along the low country and the state as a whole. So I would say it absolutely does have a role, and I think that that role, again, ought to focus on outcomes. I think that one of the problems that people have occasionally with federal policy is not much in the way of outcome, but a lot in the way of process and cost. So I think it absolutely has a role, and we ought to always focus on what's the outcome. I would just say that I would really, again, appreciate your vote and your support come May 7th. I mean, it's an incredibly important election. I mean, when Admiral Mike Mullen, who was former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, when asked what's the biggest threat to America, the answer is not the Taliban or what are the Chinese or somebody else going to do next, but the answer is the American debt. I think it's telling that American man, military man, is saying something like that. So I have a long list of experiences and a long list of, in essence, credentials in terms of action, in terms of trying to do something about that. I'd like to take what I learned in Congress and the governorship, my experiences on the way up, my experiences on the way down, all of it, and apply it to what is arguably one of the great debates of our civilization, which is how do we get our financial house in order, because there are going to be incredible implications and consequences for every one of us here along the 1st Congressional District of South Carolina, and ultimately the jobs and opportunity that will be provided in the American system. Thanks so much.